Part two, so where we left off last time is we had created a set of stairs. I was showing some examples, like what if we, and I kind of like I changed this back to standard. Let's go right back to animate. I like that it sits up here. I think it's easier to see from a tutorial standpoint. I'll just make the windows just a little bit bigger here. Okay, so I was messing with the rotation of that. But the first thing is I want to have a set of stairs. And I also would like to animate it so that the stairs appear or that they grow right into the scene. So to do that, we need to keyframe it, right? So this is the thing that's controlling how much height is there. So let's just set it to 0 at the very beginning of my animation, and I'm just going to key that. And then I'll go to, let me just double check here before I start keyframing. Let's make this 24 frames per second, and for now, 90, let's do 120. I'll probably need those extra frames a little bit later on. So, all right, we're back to frame 0 on the step effector, and I'm going to keyframe the scaling in the y-axis. So I'll just put that there, and then I'm going to go to frame, let's just go 24. And I'll say 5, right? And I will key that in there. I'm in my little dope sheet down here so we can see some of those keyframes. Right, and it just grows. They all grow at the same time. Some grow faster than the others, but I get a set of steps. Not exactly all that exciting from an animation standpoint, right? It's a start. Okay, so how can we add some pop to this? So we could animate this by hand. We could animate the scaling of the cube, though it's not really set up the right way to do that in this instance. But the point here is how to use a system so that we can make changes quickly in the future without having to go back and keyframe individual components, if we can get away with it, right? So let's use another effector to help us out. So with the clone selected, I'm going to go back and see what I have in the list. Right, so we already looked at step, random. We'll look at that later. Pretty self-explanatory, I would hope. But there's a nice one here called delay, and we'll go ahead and use that. And it's a good idea to double check. You can see within the effectors for this cloner that I created, there's the step and there's this delay that's in here. All right, so let's look at the delay. It has a strength. It also has a mode. It doesn't really have much for parameters. It just says position, scale, rotation. So, if we wanted the effect to only work on the scale and we were doing something else with position, don't worry about deformers and fall-offs and stuff. We'll talk about those things later if needed. But let's just see what happened with this. Right? And you don't really see anything in here. In fact, I'll turn the strength up to 100. You can see it's so slow, right, as it drives through here. We try a less amount. I'm not really going to see anything with this. I'm going to put it back to 50. I actually don't even know what blend and even do in these modes. I never really looked at them because every time I've ever seen anyone do anything with delay, they use spring. And I think for an obvious reason. So let's go ahead and change that to spring. And we'll play this a little bit. And it's real subtle. In fact, I'm going to make my preview range a little shorter for now. Let's make that 90. But maybe you can see that it comes up and it kind of goes a little bit too far and settles, kind of wiggles a little bit. Let's make this 70% on the strength for this, and it should be a little more apparent. So the whole idea here is that it applies a keyframe effect so that when the scaling happens, it overshoots, right? It goes a little bit past, and then it comes back and it goes a little bit below, and it kind of settles, right? So it's like a squash and stretch procedurally, right, and how this is working. And if we want this to be maybe even a little more pronounced, I'll turn up the effect. Right, so you can see it has a lot of it's also slower as it's working through there. So that's fine, right? Already this is a little more interesting, I would say. but they're still all happening at the same time. And what I would like to do is control how quickly or slowly or each one of these start to spring up out of the ground, right? If we want to think of it that way, or I guess we could put a ground plane in here. Why not? Right. So let's just put this. Right. So I have something for it to sit on. Okay. So so how do I affect this? So there's several ways we could play with this, but a core component of this workflow. So we create an object and then we clone it, and then we position the clones, and then we want to animate them or distribute them in a different way. We would then use an effector. Okay, the effector is working on everything within the system. How can I control where and when and how much these things are affected? Well, it's just like in Photoshop. If I used a filter, right, that would be the parallel to our effector, right? So let's say I want to blur something. I would use a mask and say, hey, you can blur the image here, or you can blur the image there. It's the same thing with this, is that we want to say, well, when should this stepping happen? When should it grow, right? That's what we animated, if we look at this. You know, we animated this going from from frame 0 to frame 24. This is when this is happening, and afterwards it does its slight little wiggle. But what if we could control this? So let's go into the step, and we'll go to fall off. So the fall off is where these masks, if you want to think of it that way, happen for these effects. And in Cinema 4D, they use, instead of calling a mask, and that's just my idea, like I want to compare it to something, but they wouldn't call them a mask, they would call this a field, right? And so these are a way of deciding where this effect happens. So, and there's lots of them. I'm not going to look at all these. I want to try to start with the simplest one, and that would be this linear field. So if I just click on this, a linear field will load itself into the animation. And maybe I showed this in class. So this came in at the center of the world. I made a little joke by looking kind of like a little TIE fighter with its little wings here. But one thing you'll notice is it has this little arrow. So this is showing the effect. So everything on this side of this, these two panels, so everything that's on this positive side, this would be 100% of effect, and everything that would be on this side, I hope you can see my cursor, on the left-hand side would be 0, and anything in between is 50%. So you can just see right now, it did do the step, but it did it 50%, right, of that effect. And this really isn't the best way to position the linear field in this case. What I want to do is have it start at nothing and then move this through the staircase and have it grow. So let's point this field along the, in this case, the minus z is what I'm looking for. And oops, let's grab our move tool. Right. So now if I go back to the beginning and I press play, nothing will happen because over here is 100% and this is 0, or sorry, this is something between 100% to 0, and everything on the far side is 0. Right, so, and these go on forever, right? So this field just goes all the way into the distance, just as this field goes all the way into the distance. Okay. I can also change this a little bit so I can scale down where the effect, this is like the transition, right? So this would be, and I'm just gonna leave it at this point right here. And just so we can see how this works, let's go ahead, if I just press play and I move my field through here, right, you can see what's happening, right? And I'm just doing this interactively. So as I move it over here to the far side, and if I narrow it in here, I can also narrow this down, right, a little bit. So I'm only affecting some of the little, a narrow band, so it's a little tighter. In fact, I'm gonna leave it at that, that's kind of nice. All right, so I'm just gonna go back to the beginning and I'm gonna press stop on my playback and go to frame 0. And I think what I'd like to do is probably not do anything at the beginning. Maybe I'll get to about frame I don't know, frame 30. Let's go to frame 30, and what I want to do is animate this field moving through the stairs, right? So in essence, it will be triggering the animation, right? The stepping, the effector. So I'm going to go back to the field, and it's an object up here, right? It's loaded into the step fall off, right? So it exists here, but it also exists over here as an object that I can click on. And because it's an object, it has coordinates, right? So I will just keyframe at frame 30. I'm going to put this one down, and then I'll go to, I don't know, frame 60. And let me move here and make sure it's gone all the way through, and I'll put another keyframe there. How are we doing on time? 10 minutes, that's not bad. So, so this is already kind of interesting. It's nice, you know, if based on that bounciness that's going on, I can go back into the delay if I want to. And I can turn this up or down, right? Maybe I just want just a little bit of that delay to happen, right? So there's just tiny little, but it has a nice little snap. You can really see it up there. If I make this too big, it will slow down the effect. If I get all the way to 100%, it'll be too much. Here you can see that's really bouncy, wavy at 88%. That's still kind of nice, but make sure that you have a longer playback range so that it can go through all that delay and settle, right? It's almost like Jello or water. It's really takes a long time for that to resolve out. Okay, so I'm just going to leave it at 70%. I thought that was pretty good. And we have this animated staircase, right, with the setup. And there's so many, you know, because I have this cube set up at the very beginning, I could, and there'll be a little caveat to this, but I'll just make this 0.5 or something. So I could give them rounded little edges if I want. One thing, though, we should keep in mind, you can see how it's getting stretched out up here. So a little problematic. And I could do the make edit command on this. I could start, you know, modifying the shape. I could put a different object in here if I wanted to, instead of using a cube. It could be anything else, right? So it's just this one object. It's just a copy, and we get this animation system out of it. So one last thing I want to show is that if we go into the clone, let's see, where do I want to go here? So if I go into these effectors, we deal with the transform. Don't even worry about this stuff, right? These little sliders, and they're still useful in some ways, but we're not going to touch that. And we're not going to worry about the deformer. But let's go into this step itself, and it has this color parameter, which I always just kind of blew past those and didn't really pay attention to it. But you can do a lot of really interesting things with it. So if I say Effector Color, and I turn that on, you can see, let's just go ahead and play. So you can see the colors change over time based on how much that object is being affected. And because as the field runs through it, the effect is applied, and black means less, and the white means more. Effect is applied to it, right? We can also go to the, so instead of looking at the effector color, let's look at the field color. Right, so you can see it goes from white to red based on the strength of the field being applied to it, right? So you can see one's kind of pink here, this one's a little bit orange, and it's a little bit hard to see with the lighting, but these are still white, so they haven't been affected by the linear. The pink one is about halfway through, right in the middle. This red one's almost all the way through, it's kind of reddish-orange, and then these that are totally red have been totally, they have 100% of the linear field from the step effector being applied to it through its clone system. Boy, that was a mouthful, right? If I go to the linear field, actually, I can go to color remapping, and you can see here is that red color. So I could turn around and say, you know, I don't like red. I'm going to make this blue. I'm at Texas Tech. I do love red. For the thought police that might be looking at my tutorials, red is fine, but I'm going to start with blue. The other interesting thing too is I could use a gradient here, right? So I could say go from one color to another. So it's kind of nice, and again, it's a gradient, so let's just make it orange, and let's make this one blue, and I'm going to kind of move a little bit back through here so I can see how that gradient's working. Right, so you can kind of play with what the distribution is. This little knot here biases the setup. Right, I can even put another color, and let's put this one as green. Boy, this is really getting obnoxious, I think, from a visual standpoint, but you get the point. Right, so there's even that special little green one that was in there. Okay, so these effect colors, I did mention this in class. If you're using Redshift and you put a Redshift material on the cloner here, you won't see the colors without, there's a little something you have to do into the shader network. I will post a tutorial on how to do that. It is very, very simple to get that into the Redshift world. Cinema 4D, this would work pretty much out of the box, but you at least see how that's working. And it's just another thing that you might experiment with as far as the visual aesthetic of your project. It's also a nice way to see how something's working in the system. Okay, 16 minutes. I will call that done. We're going to go on to, I will have a fancy part 3 here in a minute.